Okay, guys, I just noticed something weird. Go to NASA. Take a look at this. What's going on now? Live. Yes, okay. It's not what it says here. What? Right, load it up here. Just find that TV. Right then. I have a bit of this in here as well. Alright, okay. Let me see. Just do a quick conversion. Right now it's basically, yeah, it's radio. Let's see what this is.
Thank you so much. So today I'd like to talk about the next chapter in this story. We will increase Earth-based observation, and we will extend the life of the International Space Station. We will build on the good work already done on the Orion crew capsule. We will increase investment right away in other groundbreaking technologies. We want to leap into the future by investing in groundbreaking research and innovative companies. We're going to modernize the Kennedy Space Center, creating jobs as we upgrade launch facilities. We will partner with industry. We will invest in cutting-edge research and technology. The space program has fueled jobs and entire industries. And in fulfilling this task, we will not only extend humanity's reach in space, we will strengthen America's leadership here on Earth.
Good morning and welcome to the Center for American Progress as we discuss the future of human space exploration with our special guest, the Administrator of NASA. This is the second program in a series on space exploration here at CAP. In June, we remembered astronaut Ed White on the 50th anniversary of his historic walk in space and its impact on our country in 1965. But as we noted then, our prime focus is looking forward into space. Where we'll go, how we'll get there, who will come with us, and maybe who we might meet along the way. This morning, the CAP website has posted a column written by our colleague Peter Jewell, Forging a New Consensus on America's Journey into Space. NASA issued its report, Journey to Mars, Pioneering Next Steps in Space Exploration, earlier this month. To quote the report, as pioneers, we work to blaze the trail for others. We pioneer space to discover life, identify resources, foster economic growth, inspire and educate, protect ourselves from space-based threats, and leave a better future for the next generation. The report added, while far away, Mars is a goal within our reach. Mars also featured in another report prepared for the Planetary Society that preceded this NASA report. To quote that report, the human exploration of Mars is affordable, much of the necessary technology is under development, and lessons learned from the robotic Mars exploration program can be applied in order to build a consistent, politically stable program that spans decades. Two reports, different perspectives, but a common conclusion. a human trip to Mars is within our grasp. We also begin this program today with the rarest of commodities in Washington, a little bit of optimism. It appears there may be a 2-year budget agreement that will move the current deadlock of sequestration, continuing resolutions, and debt ceilings to a broader discussion of policy and opportunity, at least for a period long enough to catch our breath and to be reminded that when we work together, big accomplishments are possible. That may open the door for consensus, an element of democracy that is as important as oxygen is for astronauts. On education, we want to ensure that the next generation has the tools to push the boundary of accomplishment on planet Earth and on a flight to Mars. And on technology and innovation, to foster jobs, opportunity, and leadership on reaching the stars and in the process making life better in our cities and towns. Today, a new generation of Americans, scientists, engineers, astronaut explorers, NASA and private sector leaders are looking for the consensus and common agreement that will bring that trip to Mars within reach. The technical challenges involving getting astronauts to Mars are daunting, and the long-term physical and psychological effects on such a journey remain uncertain. But the prospects for American leadership in human exploration beyond low Earth orbit are brighter than they have been for decades. The U.S. government and private companies are slowly but surely putting into place many of the capabilities needed to send humans to Mars. However, many critical questions are still to be framed. To discuss these topics this morning at CAP, we have the Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, Charles Bolden, Jr. We are glad to have you here this morning. He is a leader of particular accomplishment. Naval Academy, Master of Science, University of Southern California. I had to put that in because my daughter is a Trojan undergraduate right now, so fight on. He is an astronaut, Major General, retired United States Marine Corps, 100 combat missions in Vietnam, Deputy Commander of U.S. Forces in Japan, pilot of 2 space shuttle missions, including the deployment of the Hubble Space Telescope, and commander of 2 more shuttle missions, including the first joint U.S.-Russia space shuttle mission. As the administrator of NASA, Charlie Bolden has led the agency on the Space Launch System and the Orion spacecraft for human deep space travel, new approaches on acquisition, prototypes to provide U.S. astronauts American access to low Earth orbit, and his tenure includes the Curiosity rover rolling on Mars, probes to Jupiter, our first close-up encounter with the planet Pluto, and the launching of the next generation Webb Space Telescope. It's a considerable record of public service and military accomplishment. And so please join me in welcoming NASA Administrator Charlie Bolden to CAP and his talk this morning.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Rudy and Peter, and a special thanks to everyone here at the Center for American Progress for allowing me to come in and share with you my perspectives on the future of human exploration. And first thing I would tell everybody is relax, sit back, take a deep breath. I promise I will try not to bore you. We do have Q&A coming up later, so you can come at me in any way you want. There's a famous story about the Greek philosopher Thales. One day, Thales is walking along, looking up at the sky and mesmerized at the stars, and he's so excited, so amazed, so taken by what he sees above him that he walks right into a well. In a sense, that's the old way of thinking about space and space exploration. That somehow gazing up at the stars or thinking about all the possibilities the future has in store for us distracts or takes us away from caring about what's going on right here on Earth. Of the things I admire most about my boss, President Obama, is that he rejects this way of thinking. I like to tell people he can walk and chew gum. Instead, he believes strongly that the things we do in space improve our quality of life here on Earth. More than 5 years ago, April 15th, 2010 to be precise, in what I consider to be a major space policy address, he offered a platform for space exploration at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida. The President talked about the dual purpose of extending humanity's presence farther into the universe while strengthening at the very same time our country's leadership here on Earth. He explained that these goals are really one and the same. In a relatively short period of time, the space program has revolutionized the way we practice medicine, insulate our houses, purify our water, wear our eyeglasses, obtain television and radio signals, stay safe on our highways, protect our firefighters, feed our babies, power our electrical grid, and lie down for a night's sleep. That, of course, is only the short list. By the way, despite the popular misconception, we don't claim any credit for Velcro or Tang. Exploration has taught us more than we've ever known about our universe and our place in it. Data and imagery from satellites and the space scientists who interpret this information have educated us about our planet's changing climate. The International Space Station, which I believe ought to be considered for a Nobel Peace Prize, has already taught us about what's possible when tens of thousands of people across 15 countries collaborate so that human beings from different nations can live and work in space together. Yet, for all these accomplishments, when you consider the possibilities ahead of us, there's really only one conclusion that can be reached. We're just getting started. When I think about American progress, I think actually about my 3 granddaughters. You see, I've been blessed in my life, richly blessed. When I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, during the days of legal segregation, because of the color of my skin, I had to fight just to be considered for appointment to the United States Naval Academy. I never would have dreamed that I'd be talking to you today, not just as a 34-year veteran of the United States Marine Corps and an astronaut, but also as NASA administrator, serving under our first black president. I've been blessed to be able to travel to nearly every corner of our world, and I've been blessed to have seen the planet from space over the course of 4 space shuttle missions. I can honestly tell you that out of everything I've seen, however, there is nothing, not a single thing, quite as awe-inspiring as being able to look into the eyes of my 3 beautiful granddaughters, McKaylee, Kira, and Talia. To me, American progress is all about the world in which they'll grow up. The world where they'll someday raise their own children and grandchildren. When we talk about our journey to Mars, and when we talk about the next giant leaps in space exploration, we're talking about their generation. I like to refer to this generation as the space generation, not only because of the places they'll go, but also because of the expansive way they look at our world, our universe, and the possibilities that await them beyond life here on Earth. When I've told my granddaughters we're on a journey to Mars, they always ask me, why stop there? In broader terms, that's their attitude toward humanity, toward human possibility and American progress. Why stop there? Everything is possible. With this in mind, I want to talk to you just a little bit today about where I believe we can be headed as a country when it comes to space exploration and to earthly benefits that come from it. To put this into context, it's worth just very briefly to think back to the events that brought us to this present time. Presidents since Dwight Eisenhower have floated the idea of going to Mars. But on February 1st, 2003, tragedy struck for the second time when we lost the Space Shuttle Columbia. After giving things a long, hard look, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board made the recommendation that the Space Shuttle program should be phased out. The shuttle had already had a remarkable 3 decades-long run like no other. I traveled to space 4 times on the shuttle, and I can tell you that I love the spacecraft. There's never been a vehicle quite like it, a reusable spacecraft with the beauty of an airplane, actually the world's largest glider, and the capacity to carry 8 astronauts to space with a 60-foot payload bay. But every technology evolves over time, and although this was a decision to which I didn't arrive lightly, I agreed with their recommendation, as did many in the space community at the time. President George W. Bush agreed as well, and he made what I believe was the right decision to direct the phase-out of the Space Shuttle program. Fast forward a few years to the winter of 2009. Upon taking office, President Obama asked an independent committee chaired by former Lockheed CEO Norm Augustine to review the nation's plans for human spaceflight. The committee included astronauts, scientists, executives, educators, engineers, and a retired Air Force general, people as distinguished as the late Sally Ride. Their findings, quite frankly, were sobering. I quote, "The U.S. human spaceflight program appears to be on an unsustainable trajectory," unquote. A few months after the report's release, in April 2010, President Obama came to the Kennedy Space Center and laid out the plan I mentioned earlier. This plan that would replace this unsustainable trajectory with a clear, affordable, financially sustainable, and ambitious way forward, a way forward that would expand our presence deeper into the universe while strengthening our nation's leadership here at home. The President's plan included ramping up robotic exploration of the solar system, commitment to completing the development of the James Webb Space Telescope to build on Hubble's legacy, and an increase in Earth science missions that teach us about climate change and how to potentially reverse its impacts. The centerpiece of the President's plan was and is a journey to Mars that will culminate with sending American astronauts to an asteroid in the 2020s and the Red Planet in the 2030s. To complete this journey, the plan concentrates both on getting to deep space and on extending the life of the International Space Station in low Earth orbit, enabled by a robust and dependable commercial launch system for cargo and crew as a replacement for the Space Shuttle. The reason that keeping the space station operational is so important is that it allows our astronauts to test the technologies that drive exploration. It also allows NASA to continue our study of the effects of long durations in space on the human body, while allowing our astronauts to continue to work off the Earth for the benefit of Earth. Meanwhile, the President called for deeper collaboration with entrepreneurs and other industry partners on developing the new technologies that the mammoth undertaking like Mars requires. These technologies have resulted in many planned and unexpected capabilities and products, like improved artificial limbs, memory foam, solar panels, and so many other technologies originally developed for the space program that also have invaluable earthly benefits. Of course, collaborations such as these are also valuable because they create jobs and they fuel our economy. 5 years after the President challenged NASA to send astronauts to Mars in the 2030s, we're closer to sending human beings to the Red Planet than ever before in human history. Meanwhile, a new consensus is emerging in the scientific and policy communities around NASA's roadmap and timetable for making this happen. In 2010, at the Kennedy Space Center, the President stood in front of a test model of the Orion spacecraft, the technological foundation for future deep space missions, and he pledged it would be ready for flight. Today, Orion has now flown farther into space than any spacecraft built for human passengers has flown in more than 4 decades, having completed its highly successful maiden voyage on December 5th last year. The Space Launch System rocket that will someday propel American astronauts to deep space has moved from concept to development, and it's hitting critical milestones in its construction and assembly. Meanwhile, we're moving forward with an asteroid redirect mission that will test new capabilities like advanced propulsion systems that will be needed for future human expeditions to Mars. After pledging to extend the life of the International Space Station for 5 years, the President has now extended it for 10, to at least 2024. American astronaut Scott Kelly is halfway through his year in space and will be able to study the effects of such long-duration missions and to benchmark them with his twin brother, Mark, who is back here home on Earth. And in case you don't follow us, Scott is currently outside the International Space Station conducting an EVA to bring it up to speed and modernize it. Time ever, it will cache a sample for later return to Earth. Meanwhile, our American industry partners are now launching cargo missions to the International Space Station, and they're doing it from U.S. soil. To accomplish the President's goal of returning the launches of American astronauts to American soil, we've selected our commercial partners, Boeing and SpaceX, to produce their respective crew vehicles, the CST-100 Starliner and the Crew Dragon. We recently selected our commercial crew astronauts, the first 4 astronauts to train to fly to space on commercial carriers: Robert Bob Behnken, Sunita Sonny Williams, Eric Bowe, and Douglas Doug Hurley, all experienced test pilots and shuttle astronauts. In fact, they met with President Obama at the White House just last week. What we haven't yet been able to do is secure all the necessary funding to complete the commercial crew program. Had we done so when the President originally asked, we'd likely be preparing this year for those first commercial launches from Cape Canaveral. As things stand, we'll continue to be in a bit of a holding pattern until we get the additional funding the President has been requesting. But I'm the eternal optimist. And like Rudy, I believe we'll come to terms with Congress very soon. Maybe it's just me, but I believe that the greatest country on earth shouldn't be solely reliant on other countries to get our own astronauts to space. I should note that there are 350 companies working across 35 states toward the goal of bringing these launches home. So there's a lot at stake, not only in terms of discovery and exploration, but also in terms of job creation, growth, and opportunity. Across the board, our country's new technology economy is driving economic growth, and NASA's work is providing significant fuel for that engine. We're exploring deep space, but we're anchored right here on Earth, where we're creating jobs and fueling innovation and growth, recognizing that without American ingenuity and innovation, we would be right there in Thales' well. Aside from all these measures of economic, scientific, and technical progress, we've also been able to start to do something else, and that's to break through to the public's consciousness. You play a critical role in that, and for your work to date, we are incredibly grateful. Whether it's the publicity and the excitement that surrounded the New Horizons encounter with Pluto this past summer, and the Plutomania that followed, our recent confirmation of flowing water on Mars, or the new Mars enthusiasts who flock to the movies, like me, to see The Martian. There's a tangible sense I get as I travel and meet folks that NASA is in vogue right now. There's a coolness factor, and when you're seeking to capture public's hearts, minds, and above all, imagination, those things really make a difference. Now, with all this said, some of you, and I actually hope it's not too many of you, just a few of you, but some of you might be asking, okay, but why does all this matter? Why go to Mars? So this brings me to my opportunity to do a little audience participation. This is the audience participation part of my program. So when I point to you, the audience, I want you to repeat after me. Mars matters. Okay, you got it? When I point to you, just repeat in whatever voice you want, Mars matters. So get the grumpy looks off some of your faces, smile, and say Mars matters. All right, you ready? Practice. Mars matters. All right. Because its formulation and evolution are comparable to Earth's, Mars matters. because we know that at one time it had conditions suitable for life, because what we learn about the red planet may tell us more about our own home planet's history and future, and because it might just help us unravel the age-old mystery about whether life exists beyond Earth. You all are good. I need to take you back with me. When I think the world in which my granddaughters will be raising their own children, I see a world where their kids view human beings living and working on Mars as a fact of life, much as they view living and working on the International Space Station today. A future where NASA and its international partners are using Mars as a stepping stone to the rest of the solar system. I see a future where a private space industry is launching human beings, cargo, and satellites of all sizes to space at a significantly lower price point. Thanks to the work we're doing today to make launches more affordable and to advance emerging small satellite technologies like CubeSats and nanosats. A future where the next generation American company utilizes technologies developed for space travel to develop a product that improves our quality of life right here on Earth. A future where flying from Washington to Los Angeles is a better experience both for people in the plane and on the ground, because we've succeeded in reimagining air traffic management, and we've made flight cleaner, greener, safer, and quieter. And by flight, I mean both airplanes and helicopters. I see a future where our grandchildren's children are drinking cleaner water, breathing cleaner air, and making use of cleaner energy, not only because NASA has helped us better understand climate change, but because of the work our scientists are doing in areas like green aviation and water purification. I see a future where fewer Americans are losing a sister or brother or a son because the medical technologies we perfect to protect our astronauts from exposure to radiation on a long-duration spaceflight help revolutionize medicine and the medical field. Or because the technologies we've developed to detect signs of life on other planets continue to help emergency workers listen for beating hearts in the rubble after a disaster, as was done with the Finder device after this past summer's catastrophic earthquake in Nepal. I see a world where girls and young people of color are more excited about pursuing education in science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. A world where, unlike today, there will no longer be any states in the Union where no woman takes the Advanced Placement AP Computer Science exam as we have today, thanks in part to NASA's work to promote STEM education and careers. I see a future where people in even the most remote corners of our world have access to Wi-Fi, as do astronauts living and working in space today. I see a world where the stunning images being sent home to us from the James Webb Space Telescope teach my granddaughters and their kids more about our universe than has ever been known before or conceptualized. I see a future where maybe, just maybe, humanity finds the answer to the age-old question, a question that Thales must have thought to himself as he stared up at the night sky, of whether we're alone in the universe. While none of us can know for sure what the future has in store, there is one thing that we can say with a good degree of certainty. None of these things can happen on their own. They will require future leaders to continue to make the decisions that point us in this direction. Future presidents, future administrators, and future citizens like you. President Obama has set us on a visionary course. It's my sincere hope that future leaders from all sides of the political spectrum see it through, because I truly believe the sort of future I laid out is well within our grasp. Right now, the astronaut who will take the first human steps on Mars and the scientist who will discover the next great breakthrough that makes that step possible might very well be sitting in a classroom right here in Washington, D.C. Every choice that she or he makes to spend that extra half hour in the library, or to sign up for that extra elective, or frankly, to pick up a guitar or a paintbrush for the very first time, All these choices bring us closer to the future that we all dream it is and can be possible. You know, I had a good friend who gave her life to the cause of human exploration. Her name was Krista McAuliffe. And Krista once said, and I appreciate this as the son of teachers, that teaching allowed her to touch the future. I believe that we're at a teachable moment when it comes to the future of exploration. The question is, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with it? Are we going to seize this moment and use it to touch the future? I hope the answer is yes. And I want to thank everyone at the Center for American Progress for doing your part to make a discussion, and thank you so very much again for allowing me to be with you today. Thank you.
Well, Administrator, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for your comments. What we'll do, we've got, 15 minutes or so, and so Peter, Jewel, and I will probably engage in a few questions back and forth, but then we'll turn to the audience. So start thinking about your questions, and maybe we'll put 2 or 3 items on the table at once. So with that, Peter, I'll give you the first question.
Okay, you touched on this in your remarks, but this is the big question: why is a journey to Mars important for the country? How does it help us meet these our broader national priorities? You just mentioned the STEM education and touching the future at the end.
In addition to the comments I made, let me share with you some advice I got from Jean-Jacques Dadin. And the space people in here may recognize the name. Jean-Jacques was recently retired as the Director General of the European Space Agency. At the time, he was the longest serving head of agency among my peers, the folk that head the nations of the World Space Program. And we were in a meeting of heads of agency, and I was talking about our vision of going to Mars and the exploration challenges and everything. And I was asking each of them to share with us their thoughts and what they thought their respective countries could do. And Jean-Jacques spoke up and he said, "Hey, I'm gonna tell you something, and you probably are not going to like to hear this." He said, all the things you're talking about are critically important, but we're not going anywhere unless the U.S. leads. He said, and the bad news I got to break to you is you're the leader. And so you've got to convince your nation to step forward because the rest of us are depending on that. So you heard me talk about international cooperation, international collaboration. It doesn't happen, like I said, nothing happens by chance, and it doesn't happen unless we step forward and take that leadership. Unless we do things like President Obama asked me to do my very first year, go out and expand the number of countries with whom we are associated, bring in what we call non-traditional partners. So I think I'm dead serious when I say what you do and what you're doing today is so critically important because, you spend your time trying to explain to people, like Rudy said, let's look at some positive stuff every once in a while. I live in a very positive world. We do incredible stuff. I come to work in the morning, look at my calendar and say, this is going to be a lousy day because I can just see the challenges of the day. We live down in Mount Vernon, and I drive down the GW Parkway, and I can say, in all sincerity, in a little bit more than 6 years being here, I have not had a day yet that I have driven down that parkway and not smiled to myself and said, boy, what an incredible day. Because we landed something on a planet, or we discovered things that no one ever imagined about Pluto. I mean, you ask anybody who's an astronomer or a space scientist, and they're just blown away by what we're finding about Pluto. So that's why I think it's critically important for us to do what we do and to maintain our leadership in doing that.
Thank you for that. I think NASA's an interesting organization, and we travel around the world, and NASA's really become an embodiment both of our national aspirations, but then what we can accomplish when we really pull together. And your phrase, what are we going to do with this moment that we have? Because I think really, for the first time in a generation, we're focused on measurable and achievable goals if we can pull together. So I think we've come a long way during your tenure, particularly on the next step of human spaceflight. And I think looking at the NASA report, there are copies on the table, and I know it's available at the NASA website. What was interesting, I don't know what to call it, Mr. Administrator or General. So what's interesting, Charlie, is looking at your notion of sort of step by step, dependent on Earth, developing capabilities, a distance from Earth, and then being independent of the Earth. Step by step, to do it in phases. Build that out a little for us.
When I became the NASA administrator, my very first hearing, in fact, it was my confirmation hearing, what I pledged to the Congress and I had told the President was I was going to live by 3 principles. I was never going to bring forward a program that I didn't think was attainable, was doable, was reasonable. We were never going to bring anything in that I think could not be sustained, was not sustainable, which meant it had to survive over multiple Congresses and multiple administrations, which most of you here know nobody can promise that, but you can sure work hard to do that, and that's what we're trying to do. And the third thing was that it be affordable, which means we get a funding curve from Congress. We get a particular amount of funds, and it's flat. Make no mistake about it. No one in their right mind would go into a development program with a flat budget. We make the impossible possible, and we turn science fiction into science fact, because some people may say we're not in our right mind. We take a flat funding curve, and we put multiple development programs under it, and that's exactly the reason that we're doing the step-by-step approach. We've now spent 15 years continuously, without interruption, 15 years of human occupation and work on the International Space Station, and it's still going big, but we've got a lot more to do. In the 20s, we want to migrate out to cislunar space, go back to a place that the U.S. is comfortable. We've been to the moon, but we do need to go back, so please don't misunderstand me there. But we have international partners on whom I think we can rely if we lead them there. We'll be operating in cislunar space robotically and with humans for about 10 years during the decade of the 20s. And then that will prepare us and equip us technologically and in our understanding of the human system, the psychology of long-duration space flight, for example. We'll be able to step off, and some administrator and president will sit down and say, okay, it's time. Let's go ahead and accept the risk of sending humans to Mars. And we believe that'll come in the 2030s. But it'll only come if people like all of you in this room are persistent and consistent, if we all have what we like to phrase constancy of purpose, if you will. We've got to stay focused. If we change our minds at any time in the next 3-4 years, which always is a risk when you go through a government transition, my belief is we're doomed. All the leadership that the U.S. has exhibited over the last 6+ years, all of the expectations that we've laid for nations of the world that want to be explorers will go out the window. And this is not a time that we can start over. I think we've been through enough startovers to know that people grow weary. People like to see something where you're persistent. You may be going kind of slow. People actually like the tortoise, believe it or not, because they know what happens to the hare. He loses. So I'd say if we can stay on this course through this next change of administration, through multiple changes of Congress, we'll be okay.
No, I think that's a key. That's certainly one of our tasks for picking this issue up here at the center, is how to build that consensus. Because I think we've been in sort of a wilderness phase post-shuttle, and now I think there are benchmarks, there are measurable elements, but I know that will be a challenge to take the bridge from one administration to the next and sort of stay on the path. There'll be a lot of course corrections along the way. We'll discover new things, and there's certainly a lot of specific definition. But it's been an interesting journey working with Peter and our other colleagues at CAP in terms of all the folks we've met along the way at NASA, with contractors, but also there's a whole new generation of entrepreneurs from sort of the IT world who want to jump into this space and bring their ideas and their passion and their commitment to it. And so that's how you build consensus. And, we'll do our part to figure out how to reach across the aisle and, work it from that angle too. But I think building sustainability and building that consensus is clearly one of our major political goals. We'll leave the engineering to you, and we'll work on the consensus side of that.
That's a deal.
What I like to do, let me intersperse a couple of questions from the audience, and then I'll yield back to Peter. This gentleman right there in the front row.
Hi, I'm Chen Weihua, China Daily. I mean, everyone watching the Hollywood movie, The Martian, obviously is inspired by this China-U.S. cooperation in space, but that's Hollywood science fiction. So back on Earth, I want you to talk about what is your commodity of optimism in this China-U.S. cooperation in space, given this Frank Wolf Act is kind of blocking the way in every aspect. And also the SED this year.
Importance to people here in the U.S. and around the world is the study of the Earth's crustal deformation of movement, geodetics. We work cooperatively with the Chinese Academy of Science on the study of geodetics. We're working cooperatively with them on characterization, glacial characterization in the Himalayas. As a matter of fact, there was a NASA Chinese team in Nepal at the time that the earthquake struck this past summer. Our teams were okay, but they sprung into action, bringing the data down from space that would help find places where people were, bring in the types of equipment that were needed to affect recovery and disaster relief. So we are working cooperatively with our Chinese counterparts right now. And the area of human spaceflight, I think, will come in time. I am a person of great patience. You know, it would have been awesome for us to be working with the Chinese today, because the agreement between President Hu and President Obama back in 2009 came to fruition, to look at ways to collaborate in terms of human spaceflight. You know, I had an incredible visit to China to look at their program, but I think in time things will come. It's always the big thing on the table, but be patient and become the eternal optimist as I am. It's going to work out. You know, what will happen in the Congress, no one can say. Again, I think over time what will happen, and you know, some of the people sitting in this audience will probably be the head of the House Appropriations Committee someday, I hope. Or some of the students that I met last night when I was up at Harvard on campus for another forum. It's the space generation that I talk about, my granddaughters and their generation. That's within my lifetime. Some of them become members of Congress and make the decisions under which we live today. So again, I say I'm optimistic, and I think things will work out. But it's going to take a generational change. The good thing is, the present generation, the space generation, is fired up to make things happen. You know, they were the ones who were cheering and screaming in The Martian when NASA and the Chinese Space Agency collaborated, and boom, we went and saved the day.
We'll take another one from the audience. Ma'am.
And you have a lovely smile, by the way. I was hoping he'd call on you.
Well,
You were the only one smiling in the tough parts of my remarks. So that's why I kept coming back to you.
I also have 3 grandchildren.
All right.
I can relate. My name is Diane Farrell. I'm actually with the U.S.-India Business Council. And my husband is in Houston as we speak as part of a group of scientists that were invited to come and debate the next landing location for the Mars project that you have on the books. So he was thrilled to hear that I was actually going to be here and have to address a question. But my question actually relates to India. I'm interested to know what you've learned as a result of the successful Mars orbiter mission, since they were able to value engineer it so successfully from a financial perspective, so no doubt there are lessons learned. And then the other is a lingering question that comes up generally about space exploration and when you talk about human expedition to Mars. As robotics continue to evolve and become more and more sophisticated, do you oftentimes receive questions asking whether or not we need to send humans to Mars, or whether we could do this more successfully with less cost if we did it through robotics?
You know, India is a great, I appreciate you bringing that up. We are definitely engaged, along with Secretary Kerry and the State Department, in a continuing U.S.-India dialogue. And that dialogue has expanded to what is now called the U.S.-India Space Dialogue, underneath the broad framework that Secretary Kerry has. We were a partner with India in getting the MOM, as they call it, mission, the Mars Orbiter mission, designed, built, put into place, and we played a key role in helping them with navigation and communications with the orbiter as it made its way to Mars. And it is not lost, it should not be lost on any of us, that because of the collaboration between NASA and ISRO and the Indian Space Research Organization, India became the only nation in the world to ever make it successfully to Mars on their first attempt. It was dicey, I will tell you, days before the actual orbital insertion, because our folk came in and said, hey, we got some questions. Can we just do a test? Sort of a dry run like NASA does stuff all the time. And we did, and found out that the Indians probably should do another burn, just a slight adjustment, to make sure that we didn't miss the planet. That came about as a result of collaboration and cooperation. So India is a great example. The work we're doing with Africa now, emerging nations in Africa, mostly in earth science. We have a project with the U.S. Agency for International Development called SURVEYOR that looks at ways to get data, earth science data, to nations around the world. That's very effective. And going back to the question about China, I think you will see that over time there will be an emerging dialogue there. In terms of robotic versus human, there is no either or. It's a we need both. If you look at our human exploration of Mars, it began more than 40 years ago, believe it or not. With the very first lander and orbiters to go to Mars, we began getting the kind of data that we needed. Questions about human existence. Is there water? What is the atmosphere like? What are we going to find in terms of radiation environment? Those are questions that we didn't need to answer for robots. Robots don't drink water. They don't need air. Well, sort of. Not the way we do. And as a general rule, we can harden them pretty easily against radiation. We sent rovers and orbiters to answer those questions because we intended to send humans. As I said, presidents since Eisenhower have talked about going to Mars. So tell your husband it is essential that we keep robots on the team and that we insert humans whenever it's reasonable to do so. And that's what we're trying to find, is the happy balance between human and robotic. I will take just a moment, because I talked about Pluto. Imagine what the marvels would have been had New Horizons been followed in trail by a human mission that had the new information about Pluto, the mountains, the water, the atmosphere with perhaps vapor in it and stuff like that. Imagine what we would have discovered in a quick journey of humans around the planet. We're going to be looking at data for the next millennia, data that came from New Horizons. A human, just as Harrison Schmitt and other Apollo astronauts did when they finally got to the moon, you had very learned people who had been told by learned people back on Earth, get that rock, very specific. Get this thing because we're going to put you in this crater and we want you to get that. The astronauts went, people like Schmitt, and said, no, I didn't tell me to get that rock, but I've never seen anything like that. So I'm putting that in my pouch and we're bringing it back. And some of the greatest discoveries that have come from our lunar ventures are things that were serendipitous. I think it's Gene Cernan who commanded the last mission to the moon, who made the statement that, we came all the way to the moon to learn about our own planet Earth. So, do it. Yeah.
Jason Callahan for a quick question. We're getting short on time.
I'll try to make my answers short.
Hey, Charlie. Jason Callahan from
Jason,
the Planetary Society. There seems to be a theme of international collaboration in some of these questions, and this sort of follows on that. I think for international partners and partners in industry, what they tend to look for in NASA's plans are ways that they can contribute. They need to see what their role is. How do you feel the Journey to Mars plan that NASA's laid forward, how do you see that allows them to find their place in this plan?
Let me give you what we asked. What preceded our publication of the Journey to Mars document was in our last heads of agency meeting before the one that we had in Jerusalem 2 weeks ago. I asked the other heads, I said, look, we're going to send you a copy of 2 matrices that we use to guide us. One is the technology development matrix, and I think you're very familiar with this, that lists, as far as we know, we can think, these are technologies that we haven't wrestled to the ground yet. These are technological risks. There is now a technology roadmap, the second version of it, that's over at the National Academies for evaluation and public consumption and comment. And we sent them also a second matrix that is the human research matrix of these are threats to the survival of humans on a journey to Mars. Please take a look at this. If you have similar matrices, share them with us and the other heads. If you don't, mark ours up. Be critical as you look at it. Tell us if you're already doing big space programs. And we listen to everybody, talk about what they can do. And nobody, unfortunately, nobody stepped up yet to say, we'll take that. I mentioned the 10 years that we're going to spend in cislunar space. It will be critical for industry, both in the United States and elsewhere, but most importantly for our international partners to finally step up and say, look, we're really with you on this journey to Mars. We want to do some stuff in the interim at and on the moon. We'll take the lead on preparing a lunar lander, or we'll take the lead on preparing a lunar lander, or we'll take the lead on a seismic device. That's what it's going to take. We're working right now on what we call what do we call it, Mike? The next generation COTS. What's the next thing for us? It's trying to get industry and entrepreneurs engaged in replacing NASA and the other governments of the world in taking care of low Earth orbit. The International Space Station has a finite lifetime. So we're trying to get industry, academia, entrepreneurs to step up and say, hey, we have some proposals for ways that we can replace the International Space Station with smaller modules, groups of modules, multiple orbits instead of just the one orbit that we're in, because we think that there is money to be made or there's progress to be made if we can do this. So we'd like to step forward and do that. That's really hard to get people to do, and so what I'm hoping will come from the center is that you will join us in pummeling American, and I mean that, just pummeling American industry and say, okay guys, all of you say you can do it better than NASA. Which piece of NASA's pie do you want to take? All of you says NASA has too much on its plate. Which piece do you want to take off NASA's plate as your own? And that doesn't mean you go to NASA for money. That's the critical piece. Who is willing to make the investment? Who is willing to make the corporate investment for their shareholders or their constituents in their home country that says, if we depend on NASA, we're not going to get this done because there's too much on their plate. We'll take that. So that's what we really need, and hopefully your husband will push us to do that. Okay?
Peter? Okay, well, just sort of building off the earlier question about robots versus human, it's framed that way a lot, but I'm kind of more curious, and our friends at the Planetary Society have raised this issue of how humans and robots can work together, especially in Mars, where it takes so much time to get the signal back and forth from Earth. If you could operate it like a remotely piloted vehicle by humans there. So if you wanted to discuss that a little bit.
I think, again, I'm going to give you this is my brain waves. The first humans to go to Mars, the first humans to actually set foot on Mars, will land, and they will not have to build a habitat, because the habitat will have been constructed by a team of robots like we have today that build cars, that prefab houses. Most of us live in houses that were built by robots. It's just we send a team of contractors out to the lot, and all this prefab stuff comes in, and they put it up. How many of you work with Habitat for Humanity? Anybody ever work? When you go to the building site, what's there? All the prefab stuff. They know I can't do anything. They teach me how to use a hammer and a nail, but it's all been prefabbed and it's been done by robots. That's what we're going to find when we go to Mars. We're going to send a team of robots in. We will use the robotic, don't worry, We'll send the robotic precursors in that are orbiters that'll find the necessary sites that are the best places to go. And then you'll land a team of robots that will go in and burrow underground. I think we're going to probably live underground for the most part. And it gets rid of the need for above ground shielding and all this kind of stuff. But that's what I think we're going to do. And that's what I call collaboration between humans and robotic technology. The way that we do much more today, whether you're talking about national security, the military, it is this incredible back and forth among robots and humans. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Administrator, Astronaut Charlie Bolden, let me thank you for being here with us today at the Center for American Progress. Let me thank you for your service to the country and the Marine Corps as an astronaut and as the administrator. And let me thank you for the vision that you've put forward today in terms of human exploration. And so we welcome you. We enjoyed working with your team, and our goal is to help build that consensus in terms of moving forward, because when we're together, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish.
Great.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.